My pleasure. Now, go sit down. Be quiet now. Obey my orders for fear of the gods. However, many Olympus holes are powerless to protect you when I come to throttle you with my irresistible hands. Whoa! So here we go. We're back to this notion again of power. Sit down and shut up, he says to the woman, or I will jack you, I will throttle you, is the translation of Fagles. He subsided. But Hera the queen, her eyes wider, was terrified. She sat in silence. She wrenched her will to his, and throughout the halls of Zeus, the gods of heaven quaked with fear. Note the interesting difference between the way Hera will respond to Zeus and the way Achilles responds, of course, to Agamemnon. And you could kind of almost predict this. Nestor-like, Hephaestus, the lame god, that is to say, the only god that isn't perfectly beautiful. And in fact, the gods even make fun of Hephaestus. And we'll hear why Hephaestus is lame is because Daddy Zeus got mad at him once and threw him out of heaven, and he's crippled and all of that. By the way, notice more verbal fighting going on between Zeus and Hera. Hephaestus then, like Nestor, seeking to calm things down a bit, he pleads with his mother, pleading, springing, I'm at line 705, pleading, springing up with a two-handed cup. He reached it, Hephaestus, toward his loving mother's hands with his own winning words. Patience, mother, grieved as you are, bear up. Or dear as you are, I have to see you beaten right before my eyes. I would be shattered. What can I do to save you? It's hard to fight the Olympian strength for strength. You remember the last time I rushed to your defense. He seized my foot, hurled me off the tremendous threshold, and all day long I dropped. I was dead weight. And then when the sun went down I plunged on Lemnos until little breath left in me. But the mortals there soon nursed a fallen immortal back to life. And all at that, with Hephaestus speaking, at that, the white-armed goddess Hera smiled. It's an interesting thing. It's almost like she smiles, but she smiles going, you're right. I'll come back to fight another day, right? Hera smiled, and smiling, took the cup from her child's hand. Then, dipping sweet nectar up from the mixing bowl, he poured it round to all the immortal gods left to right. An uncontrollable laughter broke from the happy gods as they watched the god of fire breathing hard and bustling through the halls. In other words, they laugh at him because he is the one who's working to share. And of course, there seems to be some suggestion they're making fun of him as well because he's crippled. So you get kind of a sense of this culture that's you're the gods. But let's point out something. Notice Agamemnon and Achilles fight, and ultimately it becomes a major dissension. Here, Hera and Zeus fight, and yet Hera's willing to give in. She realizes she has to give in for the better of all. She has to give in. That hour then. And all day long till the sun went down they feasted, and no god's hunger lacked a share of the handsome banquet, or the gorgeous lyre Apollo struck, or the muses singing voice to voice in choirs, their vibrant music rising. So notice at the very end of Book 1, after all the fighting that's gone on, we have laughing, we have singing, we have joyful partying happening with the gods. Why? Well, in a line, scholars have pointed out, because the gods don't have to worry about Time and Kleos, because they are immortal. Humans have to worry about those things within Greek culture, and therefore you have this dissension between the two great warriors. The final lines of the poem of Iliad 1. At last, when the sun's fiery light had set, each immortal went to rest in his own house. The splendid high halls Hephaestus built for each, with all his craft and cunning, the famous crippled smith. And Olympian Zeus, the lord of lightning, went to his own bed, where he had always lain when welcome sleep came on him. There he climbed, and there he slept, and by his side lay Hera the queen, the goddess of the golden throne. Again, all the different type scenes that we see now repeated throughout the first book. All right, let's turn quickly now to work levels 2 and 3. At 2A, well, of course, major messages. Time and Kleos matter, as we've said, and in Homer's time they mattered. What about today? That's a 3B question that you might want to consider. Do we still think in these kind of terms that, well, it's all about, does salary, for example, matter? When you get, for example, a bunch of adults together, what the amount of money that they make, does that really matter? And if it doesn't matter, then why do certain people decide to major in one thing in college rather than another? Very interesting, right? Go home and tell your folks that you're going to major in poetry instead of being an engineer. And sooner or later, they're going to get around to what? Time, right? Let's as well say that the message here is that there are repercussions for actions, aren't there, right? I mean, it's like ripple effects. Someone always has to pay. And let's go ahead and point it out. Oftentimes it is the innocent who have to pay, right? And then finally, notice this as a possible message. Verbal violence can also often lead to physical violence. I remember I was lecturing the Iliad one year, and while we don't have altercations in the halls of Orland High School very often, there was an altercation between two young men. And several of my students who had been studying the Iliad with me came back to report the next day, and what they reported was more fascinating than the actual fight that occurred, was what happened preceding to the fight. That it began, first of all, with a shoulder check in the middle of the hall, then everybody backed up, and then it went to language. There was the language, and then there was the pushing with the language. Before there was ever any kind of real serious blow struck, you have this kind of thing. And of course, everybody's watching, and so they pointed out, you got serious amounts of issues going on with the possible loss of Time and Kleos. Understood because, of course, our reading of the Iliad. At 2b, right, not what the poet says, but how the poet says it, that is to say, the rhetoric. Well, we've got the invocation of the muse. Anytime you pick up an epic poem, you'll kind of see some version of this. We'll certainly see it with the Odyssey and the Aeneid, right? As well as, most importantly, as we'll say here in a second in 3a, Paradise Lost. Note the layering effect, right? That is to say, we have similar kinds of scenes happening. Let's list several of these. You have Agamemnon and Achilles fight. You have Zeus and Hera fight. You have Nestor calming. You have Hephaestus calming. You have... of course, Chrysis, the father of Chryseis, who is like Thetis, supplicating on behalf of a child, right? Asking help from the gods for their child who's in trouble or whatever. Also notice we've got some interesting symbolism going on in this text. We said we were going to kind of look at some of the major symbols of this text. The lyre of Apollo, the bow of Apollo already are powerful symbols, one for killing, one for singing and music. Of course, we have that scepter of Agamemnon that's already mentioned, and we're going to see that scepter again in the second book. You can come up with your own symbols as well. Of course, we also have irony. We said we were going to pay attention to that. We know that Troy is going to fall. And yet, the irony of all ironies is the violence at the beginning of the poem is actually between the Greeks themselves, right? At the beginning with verbal violence, of course. At 3a, in the relationship to other texts, well, note how all of the other epic poems that we will study, and I'll just list a few of them in AP English, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, the Inferno, Beowulf, Epic of Gilgamesh, Paradise Lost, really important. All of them kind of play this game of the invocation of the muse, the setting up of the adventure that is about to be a key part of the epic poem, that narrative story. We can even ask, and we'll do this, about the other kinds of texts that you're familiar with, the books, the movies, the games, the video games that you play, that already play similar kinds of motifs as well. Finally, at 3b, well, how about this one to try and relate to yourself personally? A time when verbal violence in your life led to physical violence. Maybe not necessarily directly with you, but something that you saw or watched, right? How about this one? Another question at 3b. Do you pity Achilles at all for the loss of his teammate? And do you see him as at all heroic, or do you just see him as kind of a crybaby? Modern readers often see him as a crybaby. Greek views of this of Achilles did not see it that way. And in fact, when we study Plato's Apology together, we will see that in fact Socrates himself will reference Achilles as a great hero, kind of seeing himself in some ways as a Achillean-like hero who has been accused of something that he shouldn't be accused of. And in some ways, Socrates loses his both Time and Kleos in Plato's Apology. We'll get to it later. Finally, and I think this is really important, we've got to ask this question. What about the women? This is, of course, a text that will celebrate that notion of the patriarchy, as we will talk about it often in room 303. Aristotle, of course, the great student of Plato, will in many ways instantiate the notion that the gods run the world and they have set in order a certain kind of understanding where men run the world and women have to get right with it. We certainly see this here. Notice, both Chryseis as well as Briseis, we never see them, we never hear from them. They don't have a voice, they don't have a say. Notice no male ever steps up and says, wait, this is insane. Let's ask Briseis and Chryseis if in fact they want to be with the men that they've been given to as prizes, right? Notice even Hera is threatened with physical violence if she does not succumb to the authority of Zeus. An important subtle message, maybe. So now we're into it, right? In medias res, in the middle of the action. We turn now in Book 2 to a dream that Zeus is going to send to Agamemnon to tell him, you're going to take Troy. Let's get it done. And of course, we, the audience, the readers, know that all of this is a contrivance. That in fact, Zeus is telling Agamemnon something that will not happen. It cannot happen, right? It's a lie. And we're also going to get in at Book 2 a great list of all of the different tribes and cultures and peoples that are being amassed to produce both sides of this great First World War. This is really the First World War of all great world wars. And to make it grand, you have to have a listing. And so we're going to have the listing of the ships, listing of the chariots, as it's often referred to. So come back to join me for Book 2 and the lecture on Book 2. Thank you.